Welcome to another episode of Liberty Mastermind Podcast. I'm Ox, along with my buddies Captain Jack, Texas Joe, and Pat. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about how I save about $50 a month on my gasoline fuel cost. So, this is an introductory episode. It's not a full-blown, super-duper detailed talk or discussion. It's just to get your brain juices flowing. I want you to hear how I've done this over the past 4 years, how I save money each month. And this is timely because I just saw an article cruising around on the media, like CNN, and it's talking about a projected 15% increase or hike in fuel costs this coming summer. So I think it's timely, you might call it synchronous, that I've been wanting to do this episode and I'm doing it now, and then I start seeing stuff pop up in the news about increasing fuel costs. So it's introductory. I hope to get you fired up and get those creative juices going. You will be able to go out this weekend whenever you hear this episode, and also you'll know exactly where to look for further information, because I will tell you exactly the main source of information about how I save about $50 a month on my fuel costs. So let's get cracking. What am I talking about? I'm talking about putting alcohol, that's right, alcohol, moonshine, in your car's gasoline fuel system. Ethanol, moonshine. Now, the origin is that maybe 4 or 5 years ago, 2014, 2013, I started thinking of ways to minimize my financial liabilities, and I kind of sketched it out. And one of the things that I saw was, man, I'm spending, this was living in Texas at the time. This was like, man, I'm putting a lot of money into gas fuel costs each month. And so, is it even possible? Is it possible to minimize that? And in my meditation about that, along with thinking about, okay, I spend a lot of money on food each month. Is there a way I can minimize my food costs each month? And that led me to kind of homesteading. I did an episode on microgreens and so on. But again, going back to the fuel thing, just meditating on that led me to a gentleman named David Blume. Now this guy, Mr. Blume, is, man, I would love to sit down and talk with him. Just seeing all the information he's been involved with is like, and hearing him speak, because I've seen him lecture, you just want to crack open a cold one, whatever your favorite beverage is, and talk with him. Interesting fellow. The main book or resource that I've looked into, it's called Alcohol Can Be a Gas, and it's by David Blume, who I just mentioned. This thing is the Bible of alcohol or ethanol production. Everything alcohol, ethanol, distillation, it's huge. It weighs pounds. If you're in a situation and someone comes in with a weapon, like a knife, a bat, a firearm, whatever, and you're in a gun-free zone and you got this book, you could literally throw the book at that person and knock him out stone cold. And then maybe holler, "World Star!" But this thing is huge, okay? And that's the main source that I'm talking about. I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to go pull it up online and have a look. A couple disclaimers before we go any further. I'm not a car mechanic. I'm a people mechanic, but I'm not a car mechanic, okay? I'm not an engineer. 1234.com if you get my joke. I'm not a chemical engineer. This is food for thought. This is just to get your brain juices going, to hear how someone else is doing it, and maybe you look into it. and maybe you tippy toe into it. Okay. I already told you my source, which is alcohol can be a gas. Now here's a fun fact, and I know Pat is his head exploding because he's like, get to the punchline. But here's a little fun fact. Back in graduate school 2.0, I did neuroscience work, some bench work, and some behavioral work. And part of my responsibilities as a grad student in the lab was to I was a rat wrangler, basically. I started a big colony at a university, and I bred a hybrid rat. That was one of the things I did. It was a hybrid of it's called a Fisher Brown Norway, and it's a really long-living rat. It's a really smart rat, and I also crossed it with a what was it? An F-35, some sort of white rat that lived a long time. So what we got from the crossbreeding is a rat that lived a long time that was really smart, and we did a lot of behavioral work with them. We tested compounds that increase learning and memory called nootropics. And in working with all those rats, as you can imagine, they pee everywhere. They doo-doo everywhere. Little doo-doo nuggets, little scat everywhere. And we had to clean it up. And we used 100% pure ethanol, or alcohol, in other words, moonshine, to disinfect all the surfaces. It doesn't leave any residue. It evaporates. And no, we didn't drink it because they put something in it. I forgot. But they put something in it to where if you drank it, you'd kind of go blind. But we used it as a disinfectant. So there are a lot of other uses. Just a little fun fact, I was a rat wrangler. Now let's go back. Let's go back to the early 1900s. So President Teddy Roosevelt spearheaded legislation in 1906 that lifted alcohol taxes for industrial use and simplified paperwork for farmers and others who might build their own alcohol stills. Now, farmers had a way to convert their grain surpluses to a useful product. That's something we talk about on the show a lot, function stacking. Now, one enterprising automaker of that time period preferred alcohol, that's right, moonshine, as a fuel. In fact, until 1931, Henry Ford's automobiles, including the Model T and later the Model A, were designed to run on either alcohol or gasoline. Let that sink in. Mass production, led by Henry Ford, and it was copied by others, brought the price of cars, and especially tractors, within the reach of the majority of people involved, either directly or indirectly in farming. Ford envisioned a day when the Industrial Revolution would benefit the rural landowner. You got that right. The rural landowner. And technological innovations would make work easier and life more ideal for that person that lives in a rural environment. Now, one of Ford's contemporaries, a very well-known man named John D. Rockefeller, had his own ideas. His primary industry was kerosene, which he distilled from oil, and its use was in boilers and lighting. Now, at night, the toxic waste from processing the volatile, explosive components of oil, they were flushed just right into rivers. Just flush them right into the rivers. Now, eventually, Rockefeller was able to use some of this toxic waste to run internal combustion engines. The fuel was dirty, it was dangerous, but it was super cheap. And since it would otherwise just be toxic waste, so at that time, this was gasoline. It was just the waste product. And what happened? It soon became the prevalent fuel in cities because it was backed by oil company money and Organization. And by 1906, because of the rising use of gasoline for fuel and electricity for lighting, alcohol production in the U.S. was down to 10 million gallons a year. Now, no worries. In rural areas, that was most of America at that time, alcohol was the main fuel and often the only fuel there was. So moonshine is pretty much what they used. So motorists, which, early cars, motorists out for maybe a weekend drive could either carry all their gasoline from town, which was dangerous. I mean, gasoline is super volatile. Or they could stop at almost any farm to fill up on moonshine. The Model T and Model A were actually a dual fuel vehicle. They were dual fuel vehicles. The distributor, which sent a spark to each of the cylinders, it was digital. You could argue digital, quote unquote digital. You use the 5 digits of your left hand to pull the lever on the steering column, and that would advance the spark timing as you drove. Now, when running on alcohol, you would advance the spark timing a great deal more for gasoline to accommodate. You would advance it more for alcohol than for gasoline, because alcohol has a cooler burning temperature and it has higher octane, which I'll get into a little bit. The dual fuel vehicles also had a carburetor that could be adjusted from inside the automobile. So you could adjust it when you were sitting inside the car and just by turning a knob. I think they called it a choke. It was on the dashboard. So wrapping up that interesting little historical story, the Model T, by the way, at that time got 34 miles per gallon compared to our average fuel economy today of 35 miles per gallon. Pretty interesting, right? So again, to emphasize, modern gasoline is essentially the waste, the sludge that's left over from processing crude. It can contain more than 400 chemicals, and all those different chemicals, that constellation of chemicals, each of those chemicals it has a boiling point at a variety of temperatures, anything from 80 degrees Fahrenheit, kind of room temperature, all the way up to maybe 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Super volatile. And when you burn gasoline in a internal combustion engine like your car, the emissions, the stuff that comes out, a major component of it is CO2, or that is carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, hydrocarbons, just arguably nasty stuff coming out of the rear end of your car. So it's basically a liquid turd going in and gaseous turd coming out. And not to mention, going to whatever, Iraqistan or whatever, to go get more oil, if you want to go down that rabbit hole. Burning it in your car causes carbon deposits. It burns at a high temperature. It shortens the lifespan of your engine. I mean, we could go on that part, but I want to get to the part that I find very interesting, using alcohol in your car. Now, the core is saving money, right? How can we impact our pocketbooks? There's going to be other benefits of using alcohol in your fuel mixture. Can prolong the engine life. Okay, it can decrease the toxic gas coming out of your car. It's got a higher octane. Alcohol has a 105 octane. It's also less flammable in case of an accident, or mixed with gasoline, the octane rating is around 110. It can stop pinging if you have an older car. It can increase horsepower. It can increase mileage out of your car if you do some simple simple steps, simple modifications. So let's get into it. What do I do? This is the super easy part. Here are the steps. Number one, I pull my Jeep up to the gas pump. It's a 4-liter, 6-cylinder, fuel-injected 2-wheel drive Jeep. I pull my Jeep up to the gas pump, and I put in about half of a tank of E85. That's approximately 85% ethanol and 15% gas. So I fill up half the tank. I got an 18-gallon tank of E85. Then I switch and just top it off with unleaded fuel. And I drive off, and that's it. So the trick is that E85 is around, well, it's under $2, and unleaded fuel right now is fast approaching $3. So I'm saving approximately $1 per gallon. So you can imagine if I'm saving, under $1, say 75 cents per gallon, and I've got about an 18-gallon fuel tank per week, I have to fill up one time because I drive to and from work. Work's about a 30-minute drive. I save overall, if I fill up 4 times a month, I'm saving approximately $50. So that's the savings part. That's how I save about $50 a month on my gasoline fuel costs. Half the tank, half the fuel going in is E85. And it's about $1 less than what I pay for unleaded gas. Now I can hear, here's the argument. The argument is that any fuel injected car after 1983, that's right, 1983, can use a fuel mixture that's approximately 65% gasoline and 35% ethanol. I heard David Blume mention that, and looked into it, pondered it, thought, I feel bold. I'm gonna roll the dice and kind of tippy toe into that direction, that ratio. 65% gasoline, 35% ethanol. I'm going to kind of tippy toe toward that with my car, my Jeep, and see what happens. Now keep in mind, all cars since 1983 have had to been able to handle ethanol. If you go to gas stations nowadays, if you look hard enough on the stickers or the signage at the fuel pump, you'll see most fuel, in fact, I can't find an exception to it, most fuel has 10% ethanol mixed in with the gasoline anyway. I mean, you're already putting a fuel mixture anyway of gasoline and ethanol. Now, all I'm saying that I do, again, I'm not telling you what to do. This is just what I've done for about 4 years now. Saves me money. Hopefully prolongs my my engine life. We've been using this fuel mixer already. I'm just saying, hey, maybe you could go higher. Maybe you grab the book. Maybe you pull up David Blume on YouTube. Now, here's some myths that I hear. How about you've got to modify your car to do this? Well, if you have one of those new flex fuel vehicles, then this episode really doesn't apply to you, and maybe you just wasted 15 minutes, but hopefully had a laugh. But anyway, argument is you have to modify the vehicle. I've heard you don't, and I've heard stories of people who run E85. There are plenty of documented stories. People who run E85 in their gasoline vehicle without any modifications, and it does fine. In fact, it does stellar. You have to think about what's your threshold of comfort. I mean, E10, that's 10% ethanol, it's already going into your car. So you just got to kind of maybe let this episode get your creative juices going. Look into this book, look online, look at David Blume's work, other people's, see what your threshold of comfort is, and maybe tippy toe into it, because you don't have to modify your vehicle. You don't have to mess with the fuel injection or the timing of the electronic fuel injection system, anything like that, you can get rolling without any mods. Now, that said, there are aftermarket programmable electronic control units that permit a sort of direct modification of engine conditions using sensors of the car. But you don't have to. I mean, if you want to go that level, David Blume walks you through that in the book, but you don't need to modify anything. Okay? Another myth is that the ethanol is a more toxic fuel. Well, I shouldn't suggest burning gasoline compared with burning ethanol, but if you look online, David Blume's got a good video of him lighting a tablespoon or so of gasoline in a bowl from feet away, because gasoline is so volatile. You can be feet away from the gasoline in like a bowl in a container and light it on fire. That's how volatile it is. All the different stuff in it. Now, ethanol, however, you light it, it burns cooler, and it doesn't leave that carbon deposit on surfaces like gasoline does. Again, I'm not suggesting it, but someone that needed to see it for himself or herself might do a little comparison. It's not. Ethanol, the chemistry is different because ethanol, alcohol itself, it burns nearly as cleanly as hydrogen. Gasoline, again, unlike gasoline, it's a mixture of straightforward hydrocarbon, carbon compounds. Alcohol is an oxygenated hydrocarbon. It's an oxygenated hydrocarbon. Before I go further, if you kind of think about it, what does a ignition source, what does fire need to burn? It needs oxygen, right? Now, alcohol's extra oxygen, along with its faster, what they call, a flame propagation, gives an advantage to alcohol over gasoline in emissions. Now, the clean burning part, because again, the myth is that ethanol or alcohol is just more toxic. The clean burning part is important for three reasons. The first the most obvious one is that the environment doesn't need any more pollutants, right? The second is that a clean burning fuel means less carbon residue to wear down the engine cylinders and rings and contaminate the oil. And in some vehicles, block the exhaust mufflers. Okay? And again, you can see that if you go pull up that video of David Blume, or if you're feeling adventurous, you can see it. When you ignite a little bit of gasoline in a container, you can see all the carbon deposit. So the third thing is, the less unburned or partially burned fuel you leave behind, the more work you're going to get out of your fuel. And therefore, the less you waste. So it's not more toxic fuel. Alcohol is not more toxic fuel. I think the argument here is that it's a better fuel. Another argument I hear is that you're going to get a mileage or mile per gallon loss when you run a mixture of ethanol or maybe even pure ethanol. I've heard information on both sides, reports that there's a mile per gallon loss if you're running a mixture of alcohol and gasoline, or closer to just alcohol. I've heard others say that you get a better gas mileage. I think if it's properly tuned, because of the higher octane rating and the fuel propagation or flame propagation, higher horsepower, that if it was tuned properly, the way I understand it is you could actually get better mile per gallon. And if you use vaporized alcohol in a engine, the thing that I've seen is that the argument is you could get a ridiculous, like over 100 miles per gallon in a vaporized alcohol engine. I don't know, I've never seen it, but again, read up on this. I'm telling you where to go find more. The biggest myth that I've heard is that, well, let me go back to the alcohol is more toxic myth again. I just thought of one more thing. Well, here's what. If again, I kind of hinted at, if the engine is designed or modified to take advantage of ethanol's fuel characteristics, remember the higher octane, faster flame propagation, all the technical jargon, it's going to generate more miles per gallon at a lower cost per mile with less than 1% of gasoline's pollutants, and with negative CO2 emissions per mile when you take into account the whole life cycle. So look more into that, but the myth that we've busted is that alcohol is a toxic fuel. Now here's the big one. Every time I kind of see me filling up with E85 and then mixing in fuel, the thing I hear everybody say invariably is that ethanol is corrosive to the engine, to the fuel lines, and that sort of thing. Remember, ethanol, that's alcohol, at 190 proof or above, that's 95% alcohol. 190 proof or above will have none of the corrosive effects virtually on all fuel system components in vehicles made after, again, 1983. Because as I mentioned earlier, since 1983, alcohol has been blended into much of the fuel in the United States, from 5.7% to more than 10% without any of those corrosive effects that people talk about. Those rubber parts in vehicles, plastic seals, gaskets, fuel pump diaphragms, floats in a carburetor and the fuel tank. There's some materials to avoid and some to replace in pre-1983 vehicles, but ethanol is not harmful to seals, gaskets, normal neoprene fuel lines, or the newer high-pressure fuel injection hoses. It's just not true. So if you, again, looking at what's your threshold of comfort, this is a pretty easy way to save money. And I know you're not going to take my word for it. Go check out the book. Go look at David Blume's information. Go find other resources online, and look into this yourself. I told you how easy it is. I pulled my car up to the gas station. I put nowadays about half a tank of E85 in. Then I top it up with the other half a tank is regular. It's regular fuel. It's unleaded fuel. And then I go. And that's how easy it is to save about $50 a month in fuel costs. So, if you get into this, think about it. If you have more than one vehicle, say you're a 2 or 3 person family with 2 or 3 vehicles, running pretty good mileage each week, you get into this, maybe you could save more. And let's do an extension of this. You save that money. Remember that episode with Nicole Sauce where we talked about, I think she calls it an insurgency fund, maybe a liberty fund or maybe a freedom fund, where if you save, say, $50 a month in gas, or whatever the $50 a month is. Okay, let's go back to this Liberty Fund, this Freedom Fund, Insurgency Fund concept. If you save that $50 a month, that means it means I didn't have to earn $70 to spend that $50. In other words, where I live, I have to pay federal taxes. I have to pay state taxes. I have to pay county taxes. I have to pay city taxes. It all adds up to like 40% on what do they call earned income, right? So to spend $50 on fuel each month, that means I got to earn 70, right? So think about this in terms of your freedom fund, okay? You don't have to earn $70 a month to spend $50 on gas. So think about it like that. Let's stretch our imaginations. How about the other argument that I've heard in the book, that if we use the clippings from our lawns in the United States, if we use them as a feedstock to basically put into a still process and get ethanol, we could have 1/3 less dependence on foreign sources of oil. 1/3 less dependence on oil. Where do we get most of the oil? From foreign sources. We go to whatever is Stan and get oil. We could use stuff that we put into a landfill as a feedstock. Am I doing that now? No. But reading about it and the process got my creative juices flowing. I think this is a gateway to stretch your imagination. One thing that I've always enjoyed about listening to other people, other creative people, the fella I call Uncle Jack, my fellow Liberty Mastermind podcast co-host, is hearing different concepts that make me stretch my imagination that I can apply in other areas. So let me give an example from my life. When I read this about how we could use grass clippings from our yards that just go in the landfill or just stay in the yard anyway, how we could use that as a feedstock for distillation to get ethanol, which could fuel the lawnmower and the car and so on and so forth. It got me thinking, well, are there other ways I could, use the grass in the yard for something else? And that got me to create a little mobile, like a tractor unit that houses guinea pigs. And they just go around, they move from location to location, and they eat the grass, they poop in the yard, and essentially they're fertilizing the yard. So they're kind of doing the work of a lawnmower, but they're also adding, it's like a soil amendment, they're adding nutrients, fertilizer. So, just hearing the story about how we could use the grass clippings to make ethanol got me thinking, well, man, it just kind of stretched my imagination. So that's what I'm hoping to inspire is maybe save some money about this or looking into this, but maybe it also stretches your imagination. The other interesting thing about what David Blume talks about is you can use ethanol in diesel fuel. How many truckers are out there? How many truckers listen to the show? You could add it to two-stroke engines. You can add it to aircraft fuel. It's not really, that's beyond the scope of this show, but things to get your imagination going. And how I did it is just tippy toe in. I started, putting, maybe I put like 2 gallons of E85 in, and my car didn't blow up or anything. And then, the next week I might have put 3 and then 4, and I kind of tippy-toed into it, no problems. So maybe you do that. And again, think about what's your threshold of comfort. I've been doing it for 4 years, a mixture of E85 and regular gasoline, and it's been working. The only drawback is when it's cold. Alcohol is more viscous or thicker. That seems to cause a little problem. But other than that, I've been kicking butt, saving money for 4 years now. So let me know what you think. There's the chance that I've made mistakes in this episode, but I know you're going to do your due diligence. You're going to check out the book. It's in the show notes. Look online. Look for David Blume. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you save some money. Let us know what you want to hear about. I like talking about ways that I save money each month. That beefs up my freedom fund. I don't have to earn extra money, spend all those taxes to go pay for something less. Hopefully it's been valuable. Let me know what you think. If you know anybody that might benefit from this, share this with them. Let's get their imagination stretched. Hopefully save them some money.
And lastly, big shout out to partner of the podcast, Uplifting Gifts. That's uplifting.gifts, where you can find all the cool, unique gift items you might want to get for yourself. Maybe you want a little treat for yourself. Significant other, boss, coworker, friends, family members, whoever. Everything you might want to dig up is at Uplifting Gifts. Featured item from Uplifting Gifts for this episode in the show notes is silicone bottle caps. That's right. If you are like Texas Joe and Pat and Captain Jack, maybe you've got your favorite long neck opened up listening to the episode and you want to save some of it for later if you're a lightweight, and you want to put the cap back on, but not that metal cap, so you put on the silicone cap. Whether you're drinking root beer like me or adult beverages like the rest of the fellas, you can save it for later using these silicone caps. Again, in the show notes, check out Uplifting.Gifts. Again, Uplifting.Gifts, partner of the show. Surf around, find something interesting. And again, thanks for listening. Seek out liberty in everything you do.